Hey everyone. Before we get started, I wanted to take a moment to talk about what this space is. This isn't a show about having everything figured out, and it's not a how-to. It's not about pretending that the creative process is neat or linear. This is a space for people who make things, or want to, or feel pulled towards creating something, even if they don't fully understand why yet. We're going to talk about writing, storytelling, books that mattered to us, and the very real human process behind making art of any kind. So if you've ever felt stuck or unsure, or like you're circling something meaningful but haven't quite named it yet, you're in the right place. So let's talk about why we create and what keeps holding us back as we go beyond the pages. Welcome to Beyond the Pages. I'm BP Lynch. Let's start off with talking about why we create and why maybe it makes us feel a little less alone. Most of us don't start off with creating with answers. We start because something is pulling at us. Sometimes that pull looks like curiosity. Other times maybe it feels like discomfort. And other times it's a feeling of restlessness or a feeling that you should be doing something else, even if you don't know what that something is yet. And I think that matters because the fact that creating feels hard or awkward or inconvenient is usually a sign that it's important. That resistance isn't the bug in the process, it's part of the signal. Creating doesn't always mean that you're confident. Most of the time, it just means that you're paying attention to that signal. Between the Waves and the Stars was the first story that I ever brought all the way over the finish line. But it wasn't the first story that I started, not even close. There were drafts that stalled out and stories that I loved but didn't know what to do with them or how to stay with it. And one of the hardest things about that process isn't getting started. It's showing up again and again after the excitement wears off, after that resistance gets louder. And what I learned slowly is that that unfinished work isn't wasted. It's practice. It's how you build the muscle, memory, and how you get the discipline that lets you keep going. Finishing isn't always about finally having the right idea. It's about learning how to move through that resistance instead of letting it decide for you. So if you've ever gotten half-written things and sitting in folders right now, that doesn't mean you're behind. My process has never been neat. It's notes in my phone and fragments that don't quite connect yet, and drafts that I've abandoned and sometimes come back to later, long gaps where I'm not writing, but I'm still thinking. I've learned not to wait until I feel ready or inspired in some type of romantic sense. Most of the time, the work creates the clarity, not the other way around. Sometimes that means changing my environment. When I was writing Between the Waves and the Stars, it was taking another trip out to LA. And that was part of re-energizing that creative instinct for me. Not to force something new, but to remember why I wanted to make the thing in the first place. I don't write because I necessarily know what I'm trying to say, at least at first. I write to find out. This book came out of staying with uncertainty, out of not letting resistance convince me to walk away too early. It was showing up long enough and doing the work long enough to let the story reveal itself. Sure, there's the outline, the themes, the big picture things, but the details, the actual connection that we build with our characters, our readers, and ourselves, that comes through the work. And that's really what this show is about. Creating as a way of connecting, and maybe realizing that we're not the only ones wrestling with these same doubts. So if you're watching this and you create in any form, whether it's writing or painting or music, I'm curious, why do you create? How do you work through that resistance? And what actually helps you stay with it? Drop it in the comments below. I want this to be a conversation, not a monologue, because I think you'll find that you're not alone. And remember, you're allowed to take your time. So I want to take a moment to look at Between the Waves and the Stars and how these concepts come through in the work. At the beginning of the book, everything starts with the ocean. And for Kiko, the ocean wasn't always complicated. When I was a kid, it was straight up magical. I'd sit in the shallows, letting the waves bury my legs in the sand. Back then, the ocean didn't expect anything from me. It was just there. A place to enjoy, a place to play, and forget the rest of the world. That idea, a place that doesn't expect anything, becomes really important later. Because as he gets older, the ocean changes. It stops being a playground and becomes something to figure out, something to master. He starts skimboarding and then boogie boarding and finally onto surfing. There are wipeouts, a lot of them. But then there's that first wave that actually works. And it wasn't pretty or anything, but it was everything. For about 6 seconds, everything lines up. And that feeling, the timing, more than the talent, is what sticks. But then grief enters the picture. The ocean stops being neutral and it starts holding memories. Sometimes when Kiko looks back at it, he doesn't just see the ocean or the water. He sees himself. I see the kid building the sandcastles with my dad, with the sun shining all golden and bright back when everything felt simple. And I see the teenager sitting alone on that same stretch of sand after my dad died, sand slipping through my fingers in the wind, wondering how the same waves could roll in like nothing had changed, like the whole fucking world hadn't just changed. Grief doesn't stop the world. It just changes how you stand inside it. 3 years later, at the start of this book, Kiko is back in the water, but everything feels heavier. Graduation doesn't feel like relief, and it feels more like suspension, being stuck. And everyone else seems to be moving forward, and he's just floating and waiting for the water to shift. It's important to recognize that this isn't laziness. It's uncertainty. It's being paralyzed by that uncertainty of living life without a map. Even the tools that used to help him, breathing exercises that his guidance counselor taught, stop working. They start losing their power. These things were supposed to help when things felt too much and things got heavy. But he finds them working less and less, and that's often what early adulthood feels like. The things that grounded you before don't necessarily work the same way anymore. And No one really warns you about that. But at the end of this section, Kiko comes to a quiet realization. I wasn't sure if it was the ocean making me feel like this, or if the ocean was just reflecting what was already inside of me. Maybe it was both. Maybe it didn't matter. And that's where we find Kiko at the start of the book. Not broken or dramatic, just stuck. And a lot of times creating feels exactly like this. That feeling of being stuck. That feeling of wanting to do something but not knowing what. Whether we're creating a painting as an artist or a book as an author, or trying to create the life that we want to live like Kiko. Feeling stuck sometimes is part of the process. It's working through that feeling that helps us find what's holding us back, that gets us past that resistance. Before we move on, have you ever felt stuck like that? Where nothing was technically wrong, but nothing was moving forward either? Or maybe you had that place that used to feel like freedom and start to feel heavier over time. If you'd like to share, drop it in the comments below. And maybe we'll talk about it more on a future episode. I also want to take a moment in each episode to feature the work of another author or artist, something that meant something to me or moved me in a particular way. Now, this section is not now, nor will it ever be, a paid promotional space. This is not an ad, and it is not made in exchange for anything. I'm also not going to be rating these books or giving out stars. I'll leave that to the book talk and bookstagram people out there. But this section will always be a real book that I've read and enjoyed for one reason or another, or even just some aspect of the book that I liked. Because there are so many meaningful stories out there, and it matters that a wide range of voices get the space to tell them. For this episode, I wanted to spotlight a book that meant a lot to me. And that book is Something Like Summer by J. Bell. This was the first queer young adult book that I ever read. And what mattered to me wasn't just what the book was, it was when I found it. It was the first time that I had read a story that felt emotionally familiar, not because every detail matched my own life, but because the feelings did. And seeing yourself in a story matters, but also being able to step out and into someone else's world does as well. And the best stories do both. They reflect parts of us back at ourselves, and they stretch us beyond ourselves. One of the things I really admire about J. Bell's work is how dynamic his characters are, not just in this book, but in the whole Something Like series. They're all different, and different flaws. They have different voices, different ways of moving through the world, and these are characters that change from book to book. There are characters I really couldn't stand at first, and then later I found myself rooting for them. Not because they had changed completely, but because I understood them better. And that's what access to someone's inner world does. It softens judgment. Kind of complexity replaces certainty. Perspective doesn't always excuse behavior, but a lot of times it can explain it. And explanation is often the first step towards understanding. That really stuck with me. That's also why When Ben Loved Tim is such a fascinating companion to this book. It's the same story told from the first person perspective, and seeing how that changes the story and how we feel and experience it again was really fascinating. Fun fact, Between the Waves and the Stars originally started in the third person before I scrapped it and rewrote it in the first person. But that's a conversation for another time. But But who gets to tell that story and how they tell that story changes how close we feel to it. And I just want to say thank you to Jay Bell. I was so glad to have a signed copy. But thank you for writing complex characters and for trusting readers with ambiguity, and for putting these stories out into the world. So let me ask you, if you've got a book you wish you had growing up, or a character you didn't like at first but came to understand later, I'd love to hear about it. Drop it in the comments below. I want to take the opportunity each episode also to get to know each other better. So we'll be answering some questions. Now, since this is the first episode, there hasn't exactly been a chance to send many in, but I figured I would go through some of the questions that I've gotten from readers through social media or in-person events and start off with those. So, first question is, how did you decide to write this story and this character? Well, this story didn't exactly start with a plot like most stories. It doesn't come fully formed, but it started with a moment. I was sitting in Fat Sal's Deli in Hollywood and with some friends and just watching people come and go, and I asked myself questions over and over again of who is this person, who is that person, and where are they going, what are their struggles, what's their life like, and who are their people. I was asking this about a lot of people, and eventually I focused in on one, and the answers to those questions, the imagined answers, started to resonate. That version slowly took shape, and that's who eventually became Kiko. From there, the story grew around what he's struggling with and how he's trying to move forward. I started outlining and jotting things down, and even wrote some of the earliest ideas, even the part of the opening scene on the plane ride back from LA. And sometimes, a story doesn't arrive fully formed. It rarely does. It starts with these questions. And if you follow them long enough, one of them becomes a character. And from there, the plot can begin to develop. So let's see. Are your characters based on real people? No, but there's an old joke. If you keep this up, I'll write you into and out of the next book. But honestly, no. My characters aren't real people. That said, inspiration absolutely comes from real life. It might be a smile I notice, an inside joke that someone makes, or just a quiet moment that sticks with me longer than, I expect. These things get logged away a lot of times without me realizing it, and later start to recombine. And it could be a gesture from one person, a way of speaking from another, a feeling from somewhere else entirely. And eventually, all of that usually turns out to be someone new. A character with their own voice, their own history, their own problems and struggles. So while real life is the raw material, the characters themselves are imagined. They're not portraits, they're composites. But they have pieces of reality in them, which is honestly what makes them kind of feel real. Do you write every day? No. Some days I just sit there staring at the blinking cursor of death. But all jokes aside, I try to write at least 3 to 4 days a week. That's the goal. But sometimes life gets in the way and work gets busy, or my head isn't in the right place, or I'm just tired. I think it's important to say this out loud, and that's creativity isn't a machine. It's not something you can force to clock in at the same time every day or every week even. And, then expect something meaningful to come out. Sometimes the work is actually thinking. It's reading something else. It's noticing something that doesn't quite make sense yet. Those days still count. And so, no, I don't write every day, but I try to stay in the conversation with my story. And, when the moment comes, I sit down and do the work. What do you read when you're not writing? Well, honestly, whatever I'm reading at the moment is usually going to be right behind me. I keep my current read on the top of my bookcase here on a little stand, so it's always visible. Right now, that's Don't Let Me Go by Christopher Snipes, which I'm absolutely loving, by the way. And next to those is my TBR stack. These are the books that I'm planning to get to next. And sometimes they change order or stay there for a little while or drop off and come back later. But I like having them there in the frame so you can actually see what I'm reading and what I'm planning to, read soon. Reading feeds the work even when I'm not actively writing. Do you listen to music while you're writing? Mostly no, but sometimes. Music is really important to this story. Kiko's Mix is a real playlist, so is his dad's playlist and his breakup playlist. And they're out there if you know where to look for them in the book. But I don't usually listen to music while I'm writing. I prefer quiet to focus and to sit with the characters and feelings. But I do listen between writing sessions. I put something on to get the feel or the mood, get the emotional connection to the scene. I use it to imagine moments and to sit with the characters and figure out where something is heading. Music helps me enter the story, and the writing happens once I'm already there. So, if you've got questions or about writing, creativity, or the process, drop them in the comments, and maybe we can talk about those in future episodes. Before I wrap this up, I just want to say thank you for spending this time with me. This first episode was about opening a conversation, not answering everything all at once. It was about sitting with uncertainty and resistance and the reasons that we feel pulled to create in the first place. If something in this episode resonated with you, whether it was feeling stuck or wrestling with resistance, or even just seeing yourself in a story, I'd really love to hear about it. Drop a comment, ask a question, share a book, or a moment that mattered to you. This show grows through that exchange. Always remember that your story matters. Keep dreaming, keep turning those pages, and I'll see you next time when we go beyond the pages.